Let's talk about the happenings of the NFL draft. That is what we're going to do today on the RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. We're going to talk a little bit from the top 10 picks in particular on this episode, and we're going to come back later in the week. I'm going to be joined by my same guest again here. It is Connor Allen from 4 for 4 and BetSperts, and we're going to talk a little bit more extensively about the running backs and how all that is going to fall into place over the course of 2025 and beyond. But today, I think we have a few interesting topics of conversation that go around some more NFL team building aspects and some of the things that happened over the course of not just the weekend, but of course we kicked things off on Thursday in Green Bay with the NFL draft. But Connor, we are sitting here Monday, April 20th, ready to the dust has settled at this point. We have had some time to digest what has happened, but how are you feeling post NFL draft? Did it live up to the hype?
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting one. Obviously, the trade in the top 5 was really cool. Shedeur Sanders falling was a hot topic, throughout the entire draft. Kept the draft interesting, I think, for a lot of people. And then a lot of, I think, early day 2, day 3 landing spots that I think are really fantasy relevant, and excited to break those down. So, I think a lot to talk about.
Yeah, lots to talk about. The first thing I want to kick off with as we go through these kind of top 10 guys to see how things play out. The 101 had been kind of set in stone for quite some time. With Cam Ward going to the Tennessee Titans. Any thoughts around, looking here to get your guy? There was a lot of conversation around the quarterback class and, where the, I guess, upside of the players were. But with Ward and the Titans, is there enough there to think that they have found their guy at the 101? It tends to be over the last maybe decade, the guy going at the 101 ends up not being the best guy in the class. A lot of that has to do with the team that they end up landing on, obviously being pretty much a train wreck because they get drafted into that situation. But what is your thoughts here on the Titans and Ward? Can they turn it around here pretty swift?
Yeah, it's tough because I think that Ward is an interesting prospect. He pushes the ball downfield really well. He has good arm strength. And I think that in most situations, he would be, fairly successful. This one, I think, is a little bit more up in the air. You have, Calvin Ridley is your wide receiver 1. Van Jefferson's your wide receiver 2. They added Tyler Lockett. So I don't know if he has any juice left in the tank. And so I kind of like struggle with this too, especially from a fantasy perspective. He doesn't run a ton. He can run, but like he doesn't, and he's not, uber athletic or anything like that. So we even projected for closer to like around 15, 16 rushing yards per game right now in Paulson's like early, rushing model essentially. I think that he's probably gonna be more of like a QB2. I'm not really pushing for him in fantasy like much, higher than that, because I just don't know if there's a ton of upside. If he's not running and he doesn't have an awesome supporting cast, like I just don't really see him making a leap as a rookie to being super fantasy relevant.
Yeah, I think this is one that's going to have to be, a couple of years down the line. And if there's anything, it would have to be from the Russian side. I think that he would deliver this season. You mentioned Calvin Ridley, Tyler Lockett. Like, you're looking then, you were confident. You said Van Jefferson was the wide receiver too. You've Treylon Burks there. Like there's not a lot like Chega Conco, as much as we might like his athleticism, he hasn't really done it on a consistent basis. There's it's one of the weakest offensive cores in the NFL. So it's they get their 101, but I can't see this being a Jaden Daniels like turnaround here in year 1, even though he had a lot of lackluster pieces around him entering the season as well. Number 2, though, I think there's a lot more to talk about with this one is Travis Hunter. You mentioned the trade element of it. I guess first, the Jaguars paying quite a substantial haul to move up to the second spot. Before we talk about Hunter, what did you think of the trade kind of compensation here?
Yeah, I thought it was, maybe a little bit of an overpay, but when it comes down to it, you're going up and getting a playmaker. I think most of us mocked them either taking Mason Graham, Ashton Jeanty, the running back, and there was even some rumors about Tetairoa McMillan at 5th overall as well. Now you're getting Travis Hunter, who can, by most accounts, I think significantly help them on both sides of the ball, and is a great kind of, I think, 1B or clear number 2 piece behind Brian Thomas, with a bunch of, like, I would say, reasonable supporting pieces as well, with Parker Washington, Gabe Davis, a couple other options there. So I'm excited in terms of Hunter's landing spot in Jacksonville. You have Liam Cohen, Trevor Lawrence. I think that this team could be fun. If you have Travis Hunter, getting him involved in screens, getting him involved like more on the offense, which I think is going to happen plenty. And then I think it frees up Brian Thomas a little bit as well. So yeah, maybe Brian Thomas is not going to see 200 targets, but at the same time, I think he should be more efficient with the targets that he does receive.
Yeah, I was very excited when they go and they make the play to draft Hunter here. You know, you mentioned some of the names that were kind of linked at number 5 when they moved up. I thought maybe they did move up for Jeanty at the time, but when we look through like what they're getting with Hunter, and you know they're adamant looking offense first and the defense side second, I think it's going to be very intriguing because they draft Brian Thomas last year and he is a sensational rookie year. We're obviously very excited about him entering year 2, but Trevor Lawrence missed a huge chunk of last season. Has been inconsistent throughout his NFL career, but you know they take Tootin as well later in the draft, and you mentioned they've De'Ami Brown. There's been some buzz around Brenton Strange over the course of the offseason. I think the Jaguars are one of those teams that there is pieces in play, even pieces that have failed to be consistent over the years, like you know, Travis Etienne. You have Tank Bigsby there. I think this could be a really fun offense, especially getting Cohen over to coordinate things. So now to move on to the Hunter side of things, just specifically with him for fantasy moving forward, is like pre-NFL draft, I would say pre 3 weeks ago, the conversation, maybe even 2 weeks ago, the conversation was going to be a defensive back will play, you know, some snaps on offense. Now it seems to have flipped to going to be a wide receiver, going to play some snaps on defense. The other part of it is then when you look at just from the wide receiver perspective, still quite raw, has a lot of upside, but there's that middle ground of like the development and moving into the NFL. But you also have Brian Thomas on the opposite side in terms of as a wide receiver, which is going to take a lot of the attention away. So you could have had him landing in Cleveland, where it had been rumored opposite Jerry Jeudy, but I think defenses are going to be a lot more afraid of this Jacksonville offense than they are of the Cleveland offense this season. So I think he's in a pretty nice spot to try and develop and to improve here. But are you thinking it's a kind of a project play that is going to take a bit of time to we see what he can do, or is there a chance here as, you know, I'm going to call him the wide receiver 2, but also wide receiver 2 in terms of the defense and trying to cover him, opening up some things from Hunter in year 1 here?
Yeah, it's tough because I think that especially from like a fantasy perspective, I think it's tough to know without knowing his ADP. So like before the draft, he was sitting around wide receiver 35 in ADP. I actually think that's pretty palatable, to be honest. I think that his upside, he doesn't need a lot of touches to do a lot of damage. And I think that's what's important, right? So like I would anticipate, my opinion is that they're going to get involved again, screens, you know, like shorter things, and just get him into space and just let him do his thing. I also think that the upside is massive. Like, you know, we saw in Liam Cohen's offense prior with Baker Mayfield, both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin having awesome years.
Yeah.
There's no reason for me not to think that Trevor Lawrence, I think, you know, I think he has outperformed what Baker Mayfield was at some point prior to his explosion in 2 years in Tampa. Like, you know, he's far outperformed that, even though, like you mentioned, he's been inconsistent. He's more than capable of delivering the ball. So, yeah, I think like if you're going to give me a wide receiver 3 price tag on Travis Hunter, I think I'm a buyer, honestly. Like, you know, the more that I dive into it, he's just like a freakish talent that I think the snap share thing could, you know, be a slight problem, but you're probably just having him not block. Like most running snaps, you're probably just not having him out there. You obviously can't fully tip your hand, but like, you know, cut out most of the blocking snaps, and then let him in there on high leverage situations, and then, you know, a lot of other situations as well. So I think that if he's playing like upwards of 80+% of the snaps on offense, I mean, this is a fantastic value, I think, early on, because they're going to be worried. There's a lot of people who are not Travis Hunter people. And I'm a little skeptical that he plays full-time on both sides of the ball, but I do think that they're going to put him on offense primarily with some snaps of defense and just see how it goes, because they need help on defense too. So I'm sure even like a 90% Travis Hunter is better than what they're trotting out as their cornerback 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I also could see it being a possibility that you mentioned like 80%. I could see it being potentially less, but having him like having a certain kind of playbook of plays for himself, and when he's out there, he's pretty much like he could have a very high targets per route run kind of season in terms of mightn't be out there for all the snaps, but when he's out there, might be getting a lot of looks. I think that he'll get steamed up a bit. I think like as we get into August in particular, I think there's going to be a lot of buzz if we get some, you know, training camp shots of him, you know, catching contested catches or burning DBs. I think we're going to see him move up, but I'm very, very intrigued at how it's transpired over the last month in terms of the flip and expectation for how he's going to be used. But let's see what Hunter does down in Jacksonville. And I think it does nothing at all to hurt Brian Thomas moving forward. I think, it's going to be more difficult to cover him if you have another exciting playmaker on the field. The next player we're going to talk about, number 6 overall, Ashton Jeanty, goes to the Raiders. The Raiders obviously last year in the draft got Brock Bowers early in the first round, so they've could be 2 real cornerstone pieces. They've got in back-to-back drafts. They now have Geno Smith at quarterback. There's not a lot of other real top-end pieces outside that, but it's going to take them a little bit of time to build it up. But Jeanty landing here with the Raiders, had you a preferred spot for him, or was this on one of your kind of favorite areas that he could have landed in the draft?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I would have obviously preferred Chicago, to be honest. I think that would have been like a blow up spot as a rookie.
Yeah.
So in Las Vegas, obviously have Pete Carroll coming in. We know they're going to want to run the ball. Last year, they only averaged 3.6 yards per carry. Like maybe that was due to the running backs, maybe it was due to the offensive line. I mean, not a whole lot's changed in the offensive line. They still have Colton Miller. They have, right tackle DJ Glaze. Like they're in a spot where I'm sure that just bringing in better coaching will probably improve the running game to some extent, and obviously better quarterback play because that opens up, a little bit more for the running game.
They had neither of those really last season. They like quarterback or running back. There was not a lot of that in Las Vegas.
Totally, yeah. So I think that Jeanty is going to see a ton of volume, but I don't know how efficient that volume is going to be. So that's kind of what I worry about is you're probably getting a good pick, but how much is his upside? It would take the offense being way better than anticipated, or Jeanty just being again, generational and have to be basically what we saw from Saquon as early on in his career in the Giants, where the team stunk, the line stunk, but he was just better than everyone else. And so he still was fantasy relevant. So I think that's possible. I'm still figuring out whether that's going to be a target for me in fantasy at the 1-2 turn, because that's generally where he's been going. I'm still kind of sorting that out. There's some great receivers there too, but I think the floor is really high. He's going to see a ton of work.
Yeah, I think that because he landed in a situation where there's zero running back competition to go with a first round prospect going in the top 6 picks, I think that he's probably going to go in those opening 8 to 10 picks by the over the next couple of weeks. I think people are going to buzz him up. If you are a fan, I think it's going to be. It's interesting you mentioned Barkley when you were talking, through the scenario where he finds himself in and how the team is set up. It really does feel a little bit like those Giants days when he got drafted and he was pretty much the entire offense and nothing else was doing it. I think it's going to be exciting, but the Raiders just are going to take a lot of time to develop. But when you look at last year versus this year and you're going through the list of pros and cons, it should be a coaching upgrade. In terms of player talent, there's no comparison at both the quarterback and running back, like we mentioned. And things like that could make it a pretty much instant, upgrade of the entire team. The problem for the Raiders is when you're looking at playoffs and so on, they're in a division that's going to be very hard for them to, compete with even the other 3 teams. So that is where the downside for them will be. I would expect them to be picking pretty early next year, but it'd be nice if they were competitive and you get into an environment where, Geno, Bowers and Jeanty are able to put up substantial fantasy numbers. That would be, I think, the desired outcome. Another one that I was very excited for him to land there, and that was Tetairoa McMillan. I was talking with Sean Siegel last week on RotoViz Overtime, and we were kind of joking about where do we want some of these players to land. And I was like, he's never going to get this far, but being a Packers fan, I would have loved him to get down to that kind of range. But that didn't happen. He goes very early at the 8th pick to the Carolina Panthers. We did see the kind of, I can't even say return to form, the breakout, I guess what people hoped when they drafted him with the 101 for Bryce Young last season in the second half of the season. How good could McMillan be in Carolina here? They obviously drafted Leggett early previously, and there wasn't the expectation around Leggett with what we're going to see here from McMillan. But are they starting to put an offense together here in Carolina?
Yeah, I think so. But a lot of it's going to depend on how, what kind of play we see from Bryce Young. If we see end of season play from Bryce Young, I think we're in a pretty good, McMillan's in a great spot. Could have maybe a mini rookie breakout. There was a lot of mixed reports on Tet. I think a lot of the fantasy community loves Tet. The NFL was really, uneven on him. But obviously the Carolina Panthers loved him. And so, enough to pick him really high in the draft. And I would assume, he's going to be their, alpha wide receiver one, which they're in need of. They had, had a little Adam Thielen. They had some Xavier Leggett. It just wasn't they didn't really have much to work with. So, like, I think Bryce Young playing well at the end of the season. Of course, Jalen Coker, can't forget him as well.
Yeah.
But
I was about to bring that up.
Yeah, you can't forget him. So no, but I think this is their real chance to have like a true wide receiver one in their offense. Now, is he going to be that from the jump? Is he going to have perfect connection with Bryce Young? Maybe. I think the upside's really high here, and the floor is pretty low if things don't click. So I think those are the kind of swings that you want to take, though, in not only the NFL draft but also in fantasy drafts as well, because like this is a guy who, if all things click, he could be 1,000+ yards, 7 to 10 touchdowns as a rookie, like, which would be fantastic. So I think that it was a good pick in real life, and I think that it could be a fun pick in fantasy as well.
Yeah, before the draft, he was going wide receiver 28. I would expect that to move up, but I do think the Panthers may be a team that, it's a committee of wide receivers. They have Adam Thielen. They did sign Hunter Renfrow, which I don't really think moves the needle in many directions. But you have Coker behind that. I think it's going to be a combination of those guys, and I think with Bryce Young, that's probably what they want to try and have some of those pieces. I'm a big Tetairoa Sanders fan. Didn't all come together last year, but hopefully he can do something at tight end as well. Chuba Hubbard obviously getting his contract last year, and now Rico Dowdle over there. They draft Travis Etienne. Unfortunately, Jonathan Brooks obviously is still injured, but McMillan, an interesting pick for Carolina. Before the NFL draft, you had the two rookie tight ends expected to go at the top end of the draft, projected to the two teams they went to, but just in reverse order. Have you changed any of your thoughts on them post-draft based on landing spot, or do you just, was it a case that you felt both teams had team needs? Is there one of those two guys that you prefer as an NFL player?
Yeah, I would say as of now, based on landing spot, I think that Loveland is, in my opinion, a better option than Warren right now. Just based on, we have Loveland going to, Ben Johnson offense. He kind of reminded me of Sam Laporta with the film a little bit as well. I anticipate that the Bears are probably going to play a little bit more 12 personnel. They've talked about Caleb getting under center. So I think both Cole Kmet and Loveland are going to play at the same time a lot. And then you're just going to have Loveland, running a bunch of routes and playing like in the slot a bunch. And yeah, I'm excited to see him more of a high volume offense. He was in kind of a little bit of a, again, lower volume passing offense in his time at Michigan, but it was a consistent contributor and a guy that, I think can make a difference for this Bears team as like a truly dominant tight end. I think Warren made a ton of sense there as well, but they clearly preferred Loveland, and that's, that's totally fine. And I think it's exciting there. And Tyler Warren, I'm excited to see him in Shane Steichen's offense and what that'll look like here. He's a guy who lined up 50+ snaps at quarterback, in the backfield, out wide, in the slot, and in line, all as a tight end. So there's a lot that he can do. He threw for touchdowns, catch touchdowns, but he's also like a legitimate tight end if they want to just use him as a tight end. So like he's fun, he's a good player, and so I think both are exciting. Now the problem with Warren is that he's tied to one of Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones. So
yeah. That's always the problem with the Indianapolis landing spot. Like pre-draft, that was an area you don't really want any wide receivers to land. You don't really want the tight ends to land. That Warren lands there. Maybe there's some chance that because maybe it's closer to the line of scrimmage, there might be some more accuracy. But the accuracy issues with Richardson pre-NFL and now when he's on the NFL are concerning. The team also don't seem to be all bought in on Richardson. So I could see Jones winning that job, and there's also huge limitations there. Like that would be the best thing for fantasy now, I think, is for Jones to be the starting quarterback, but that's also probably not the best thing for the Colts. So they're in a real tough situation at QB. When we look then at the Bears, you mentioned Loveland, passing touchdowns. Does that mean that there's a chance that if it doesn't work out for Caleb this year, that he could be the starting quarterback in midseason?
Oh, that's funny.
No. Have you confidence that it will come together? Obviously, like, it's interesting. We talked there about Bryce Young a moment ago, had a horrendous rookie campaign and obviously came back, had a horrendous start to his second campaign as well, but it did work out towards the end. What is the expectation? Like, the Bears have done everything here that they can and putting pieces around them. What's your thought for the upcoming season?
Yeah, it's tough because I think last year a lot of people were projecting the jump with just all the weapons added around him. But I think the coaching staff was a major problem. Shane Waldron's offense in Chicago was just a disaster. Now you have Ben Johnson coming in. They address the interior offensive line. I also think Ben Johnson's smart enough to, you can't just leave your offensive linemen on islands. So you can't have, just five linemen and then a guy's blitzing and Caleb just doesn't know what to do. And it happened so many times last year where he couldn't check out of it. You didn't have the bodies. And so now I think, again, playing under center is going to be huge because you can keep in Colm Kelly to block and keep Loveland in the block if you need. And then, yeah, so I don't know. We're not going to get any discount, I don't think, on anything betting wise, fantasy wise on the Bears or Caleb. But I do feel pretty strong that they're going to have a good year offensively, and it will be very fun. Are they going to win a ton of games? I'm not sure, but they're going to be fun to watch. And so that I feel pretty strongly about that, to be honest, based on everything they've done and everything they've added and the coaching staff. I mean, Ben Johnson, by all accounts, is fantastic with what he's done.
Last question on the Bears when we have a Chicago resident when we're on the show. You mentioned Jeanty earlier, and it kind of ties it all together for the running back position with the Bears. Obviously, the expectations were that would be where he may land. He doesn't land there. Was DeAndre Swift the biggest winner here of the NFL draft?
Yeah, but I would be careful because I think that the Bears are going to trade for someone.
I've seen some post-draft conversations between head coach and general manager, and it did look like they're kind of leaning towards we're not set yet. That's not set in stone. So if they do trade for somebody, anyone you'd like to see land in there?
I think there were some rumors that like Zach Charbonnet might be traded. I think that could be interesting.
That would also be nice for Kenneth Walker as well. It would be nice for both.
It would. Yeah, or one of Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet. They don't really seem too interested in like having anyone split time. I think they just want to like run with one of them. Now, both of them had their own fair share of like injury stuff. But there was also a thing where the Bears traded down 3 times after running backs were selected like ahead of them, basically. So it seemed like they got sniped on Travion Henderson, who by all accounts they really, really liked. And I think we're like, I mean, they probably should have traded up a little bit to get him, to be honest. I don't know. I mean, that was like a perfect fit with the whole Eric Bieniemy thing. And then I think they're in the 3rd round as well. So they definitely wanted a running back, and they didn't get one. And Ben Johnson seemed pissed about it. And I just wouldn't feel good about drafting DeAndre Swift very high, to be honest, because things might change.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a very good opportunity. If you didn't move him before the draft and dynasty, a chance to move on here at this particular point, with people maybe buying into him being the starter. Moving on to some of the betting side of it, we'll do some quick thoughts here on Sanders. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation that's dominated, the NFL space over the last couple of days. You tweeted out that Dillon Gabriel was drafted over Shedeur. What was going on? I have a commentator to say that they ended up getting both in the end. In terms of pre-draft versus what happened in the draft, is this one of the biggest all-time like kind of top 5 potential picks in terms of betting that slid through? Did open at pick 3.5, moved all the way down and closed at pick 21.5 on draft day, but then obviously to go to the 5th round. Obviously a shocker, but this is the truth of when you get past. If you've kind of spoiled it on a couple of teams that they don't want you, and then you go past the teams that need quarterbacks, then you're in trouble in terms of getting selected. But what did you make of the whole circus?
Yeah, this was definitely, in terms of betting, the biggest slide in betting history compared to over/under, like for sure. So that was really interesting. One of the things that happen when one of these things happens, like what I immediately think about is, okay, well, what do we not know? Because so we're outsiders, we don't have insight into meetings, into front offices, like into what's actually going on during the process. And the more that I thought about that, I tried to reach out to people and like listen to more shows and things like that. Albert Breer had an interesting report basically on one of the meetings that happened with Shedeur, where Shedeur went in there and they talked about a bunch of good plays, and they, went through the feedback on that. Like, what'd you do? And then they went through a bad play and they were like, hey, like, what were you thinking here? So-and-so. And Shedeur was like, you know what? If you guys think that, I'm probably not a good fit here. And that was like his answer. And I think that embodies, I mean, the NFL probably that, again, that was one scenario. And if that's one scenario, I'm sure much, much worse happened. And if that's something that's getting out publicly, I cannot imagine the things that were actually happened privately. So yeah, like there's a lot of problems with Shedeur. I think that he's, and the issue too is like, if he was like super athletic or super talented, he still would have been the pick. Like, you see plenty of these, bozos picked that are terrible, like character. And then they end up like flaming out anyways, but like he would have been the pick. He's just not that good. He doesn't have arm strength. He holds the ball way too long, takes a ton of sacks. Like, I don't know. Like, I get it. And then you don't, it's almost like, the Cam Newton effect before, where people are like, well, Cam Newton's good, but is he a starter anymore? Like, do you want that guy in your locker room? He's a little bit
It's
like
the circus
polarizing.
around it. It's almost
Yep.
like we've seen it a bit with like Russell Wilson last year,
Yep.
but we've seen it with like Tim Tebow. We've seen it with, Kaepernick in a slightly different way. But it's a case of like the question is going to be now every week in training camp with the Browns, like, who's in the lead here on the depth chart? Is it Gabriel or is it Sanders? It just brings a little bit of attention that maybe you don't need to have.
Yeah. And they're not like, Shedeur Sanders is not a supporting cast player. Like, he's like,
He's not going to big up his teammate.
yeah, right. Like, do you even want that guy in your locker room? And that's the point you said. Like, once you get to a certain point, like, okay, if he's not good enough to go in the second or third round, I don't want him as my backup. I'm still convinced that someone made a call to the Browns, was like, you got to take Shedeur or something, because the look on Andrew Berry's face and when he was selected, hilarious. Just
It seemed to be
deadpan.
like it may have been a GM decision rather than a coach decision or GM.
Yeah. I think some calls were made. That's all. I think I couldn't imagine picking both. And now you have the quarterback room: Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, and then I don't think Deshaun Watson's ever going to play again, but maybe that's
they're all involved. They're all involved in some way. It's a crazy mix that they have. We'll see how it works out. Flacco probably the best option for fantasy here moving forward. That's a crazy thing to be talking about in 2025. But something that I've talked about previously is teams often be like, well, we kind of have our guy here. Like, let's say we were the Giants. We were talking earlier about Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is the quarterback. And then each year in the draft, there might be somebody who's like fallen in the draft or potentially in third round, fourth round. And it's like, no, Daniel Jones is our guy, so we're not going to take another quarterback option. I think the teams more and more, and this year didn't really obviously work that well with Sanders based on some of the concerns we're after talking there about adding him into the mix. But we did see this a couple of seasons ago. We're starting to feel old here, Connor, now. Probably 10 years ago with RG3 and Kirk Cousins, maybe even longer. We're dating ourselves, but it can work out where you have two quarterbacks. But I tend to think if you do it in two separate drafts, now you don't want to put your quarterback's nose out of joint and cause issues then with team morale. But I do think the team should be like taking more chances on QBs year on year on year. Do you think more teams should do that? And I guess with the Browns, we're saying it mightn't work out, but what's your thoughts on, the draft acquisition cost of a quarterback on a rookie contract versus, trying to acquire some of these guys through free agency?
Yeah, it's massive. I think you brought up a great point. I don't know about the Dylan Gabriel one. I mean, he's kind of just, he's not my favorite player. I thought that was kind of like a weak pick. And then you doubled down by adding Shedeur Sanders. And I'm looking at the contracts too. Like, the Browns just aren't really in a good position to get rid of any of Flacco, Pickett, or because it's like mostly guaranteed money. So the problem is like,
short-term deals with guaranteed, like it's like you pay them all of that.
Yep. And so I don't even know, what do you do? Like, you just have a 4-way training camp battle and then just hope one of them shines. That's like logistically too is really difficult. So like, I agree with your thought about, draft multiple quarterbacks, let him kind of like get some reps in as, 2 or 3. But in terms of like a 4-way quarterback battle, like, who gets reps with the ones? Like, how do you figure out?
Oh, it's a disaster with the Browns.
Yeah,
like this is not the way to do it. But if you had, your QB1 and he's like year 2, year 3 in the league, and then you add in another name.
I thought the Jalen Milroe selection by Seattle was fantastic. We might talk about that later. But
we will talk a little bit about it. We're going to talk quarterbacks in the second show this week. But yeah, that's kind of a prime example. They've gone and paid for their QB, and now we're all skeptical of how that's going to work out. So you have somebody else who can maybe fill the void in a different way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, let's like take high upside swings. Jalen Hurts was that exact swing when they had Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and it wasn't long after that there was like only one of those guys that you would want being the quarterback. Like the idea when that pick was made was like, this is a bit like the Jordan Love pick, worst pick of all time. But then like down the line, it shows that this is kind of a better way to build your team to try and have kind of the next guy set up. The last thing we're going to talk about on this edition is looking at some of the team's kind of draft strategy. We're looking at team building. The Falcons, I don't know what they've been doing over the last couple of years. You highlighted it on Twitter, but in this particular draft, the Giants moved up from round 2 to round 1, and it cost them a 2025 third round pick and a 2026 third. So 2-6, one this year, one next year. One pick later, the Falcons move up basically the exact same move costing a 2026 first. But over the last couple of years, you've highlighted here some of the moves that they have decided to make. But is Fort not trying to get fired as the GM, or what's the play here for the Falcons?
Yeah, I don't know. He's drafting like they gave the sticks to like a first year fantasy football player. Like 2021 they drafted Kyle Pitts 4th overall, hasn't really panned out. 2022 Drake London 8th overall. That's been, I would say, a fine pick. That's a good pick. Probably maybe his best pick, first round pick of his career so far. And then 2024 drafted Michael Penix 8th overall, but this is after in the same offseason they paid a 39-year-old coming off an Achilles $100 million plus guaranteed. So I think from a process standpoint, obviously if Penix ends up being the guy, that's great hindsight. Process-wise, complete disaster in my opinion.
That would have worked. That would have last year would have worked fine if they like got even a low, like let's say it was Joe Flacco, for example.
Yeah, right.
But just like, and the other part is like you're signing the quarterback, but you're signing a guy who's almost 40 years old after he's shredded his Achilles to $100 million. Like it's all in the wrong direction.
And Penix is like an older prospect. So even in best case scenario, Kirk Cousins is awesome. You just have a guy that you drafted in the first round, 8th overall, not a late first, not a Jordan Love, not a Jalen Hurts, 8th overall.
Maybe what he'll tell you though is that well, what if your 39-year-old quarterback with a torn Achilles is terrible? Then I have the 8th overall pick at you. Maybe the plan all along wasn't to have to wait on Penix. Maybe it was to start him halfway through year one.
And then my rebuttal is you shouldn't have paid him $100 million.
No, that is, and I was being a complete sarcasm in my reply as well. But yeah, this year then gets Jalen Walker, which was I think a solid pick. Could turn out to be very good. But then kind of was like, I've done really good. I've got so much value here. Let me give all that value back. Let me get rid of that. So,
and for James Pierce, character concerns, like a lot of off-field issues, a guy that I would almost certainly was going to be there in the early second round, and they traded up a future one for it. It's just, what is he doing? I have no idea.
So we'll see what happens with the Falcons moving forward here, but it is interesting to see how the teams are drafting and how things are, how all the different teams are playing things out. We see with the Jaguars giving up some of their capital, obviously, to get Travis Hunter, and the GM talking after about his time with other teams like the Rams, and not having first round picks multiple years, and how teams are willing to trade them out. It's a bit like dynasty leagues where people are like happy to not have first in some scenarios. People want to stockpile them in other scenarios. So interesting to look at. We are going to finish there for today's episode. We will be coming back, as I mentioned, to talk running backs and quarterbacks. Connor teased that. We will talk through some of those landing spots and who could be the QB1 before the year is out as a rookie. Connor's over at 4for4 and BetSperts, and you can find him on Twitter at Connor Allen NFL. Connor, post-draft, what's in the pipeline here over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, we have a bunch of different, the fantasy impact of every single player so far over at 4for4, at least high-value player. And we're making our way through writing an individual article on each. And then we're going to have some more betting stuff, betting news to come, maybe some NFL futures in the near future. And then best ball stuff, focused on some of that. So a lot of fun stuff in the works.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's really nice. It's positive to know where these players are going to be this season and to start to kind of move forward with that firm footing after the NFL draft. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on social media at Overtime Ireland. Until we are back, have a good one.